In 1973, a skilled pilot took off across the Atlantic. He radioed in once, and then vanished into the clouds. For 50 years, Flight 407 was nothing more than a ghost story told by sailors and skywatchers, until the ice gave him back. The night was a living storm. Over the black Atlantic, thunder rumbled like distant artillery. Lightning carved white scars across a swollen sky. Below, the waves twisted and rose, their crests shattering into cold foam. Through the chaos, a single aircraft pressed on, a Lockheed Electra L-188, tail number LN 407. Inside, instrument lights flickered green across the cockpit. Static hissed through the radio, and somewhere amid that storm sat Captain Daniel Harlow, hands steady on the controls, eyes fixed on the horizon that had long since disappeared into darkness. At 2:14 a.m., a calm voice broke through the static. Approaching storm front, adjusting altitude. Then silence. No mayday, no final words, only the endless roar of the ocean swallowing the sound. Captain Daniel Harlow was 38 years old, a decorated veteran of World War II. He had flown combat missions over Europe before trading the roar of bombers for the quiet precision of commercial flight. Colleagues described him as the kind of pilot you wanted in the cockpit when things went wrong: calm, methodical, unshakably polite. His voice never rose, even when turbulence rattled teeth. At home in Newfoundland, he lived a quieter rhythm. His wife, Evelyn, said Daniel loved small rituals. Polishing his shoes every Sunday, spinning the same worn jazz record before bed, and writing nightly in a small brown leather journal. He and Evelyn had one daughter, Lucy, 6 years old. Every weekend, he would lift her onto his shoulders and point toward the sky as planes droned overhead. "That's Daddy's road," he'd say, laughing. Daniel wasn't a man who chased danger. He chased order, numbers that lined up, engines that purred the same way twice. But the North Atlantic had its own rules, and that March it was in no mood to play by his. Flight 407 was scheduled to travel from Gander, Newfoundland to Reykjavik, Iceland, a refueling leg before continuing on to Oslo. The forecast warned of unstable air and light snow. Visibility moderate. The crew logged weather advisories, refueled, and loaded 32 crates of medical equipment bound for Europe. At 11:30 p.m., Harlow signed the manifest. At 12:02 a.m., the Electra lifted off the runway, its 4 turboprops slicing through the low fog. By 1:47 a.m., the aircraft reached cruising altitude, 18,000 feet. Everything was routine. Then, at 2:14 a.m., Daniel called air control one last time. Approaching storm front, adjusting altitude. Controllers acknowledged. Seconds later, static flooded the channel. They tried again. Nothing. Radar tracked the blip for 3 more minutes. Then it simply blinked out. At first, officials assumed radio failure. Planes lost contact over the Atlantic often enough. But when Flight 407 failed to arrive in Reykjavik by dawn, the tone shifted from routine to dread. The search began before noon. The Canadian Coast Guard dispatched aircraft along the projected route. Icelandic fishing vessels were asked to keep watch. The U.S. Navy even diverted a reconnaissance plane from Greenland. For 10 days, the hunt continued. Over 50,000 square miles of ocean were scanned. What they found was heartbreakingly little. A single floating fuel drum, scorched along its rim, and a torn seat cushion washed up near the Labrador coast. There were no bodies, no debris field, no oil slick. It was as if Flight 407 had been lifted clean off the map. Back home, the headlines screamed, "Pilot vanishes over Atlantic." Evelyn refused to believe it. She sat by the kitchen radio night after night, twisting the dial between frequencies, whispering Daniel's name as if the signal might somehow find him. Her daughter Lucy drew airplanes on the fogged-up windows, telling neighbors, "Daddy's just flying home a long way," but the world moved on. After 6 months, the case was declared closed. Aircraft lost at sea. Rumors, however, refused to die. Some said the plane had been hijacked by smugglers. Others whispered that the government had shot it down after entering restricted airspace. And among late-night radio hosts, another story grew, that Flight 407 had flown into the storm and simply never come back. 50 years passed. The story faded into aviation folklore, another cold case swallowed by the ocean. Then, in 2023, a team of glaciologists surveying retreating ice in southeastern Greenland noticed something unusual. A metallic shape jutting from the glacier's blue wall. What they uncovered made world news within hours. Engraved on the twisted wing, LN 407. When rescue teams reached the site, they discovered the fuselage of a long-lost aircraft, astonishingly preserved in the permafrost. Inside the cockpit sat a single figure, skeletal, uniform still intact, seatbelt fastened. Captain Daniel Harlow. But that wasn't all. In his right hand, frozen stiff against his chest, was a small leather journal. And when the ice thawed just enough to open it, investigators realized the final pages might contain the truth that had eluded them for half a century. Inside the cockpit, one rescuer said, voice trembling, "We found something no one expected. A body still strapped to the pilot's seat, and a journal frozen to his hand." When the recovery team approached the crash site, they were stunned by how intact the aircraft remained. The fuselage lay tilted on its belly, half encased in translucent ice. Propeller blades were bent but unbroken, windows frosted over like crystal. Inside, the cockpit instruments had frozen mid-reading, dials pointing to numbers that no longer made sense. Autopsy reports later confirmed what many hoped and feared. Captain Harlow died instantly on impact, but a closer inspection of the flight instruments deepened the mystery. The fuel gauge still registered enough for another 2 hours of flight. The altimeter suggested the plane had maintained altitude long after the last radio transmission. Calculations revealed an impossible detail. Flight 407 had traveled more than 200 miles beyond its last known coordinates before crashing. If the pilot died instantly, who or what had kept it airborne that long? Investigators thawed the frozen journal page by page under a glass dome to preserve the ink. What they read chilled them more than the glacier itself. The earliest entries were ordinary. Notes about the weather, fuel efficiency, a sketch of a jazz melody Daniel wanted to teach Lucy on piano. But as they turned the pages, the handwriting shifted, neater lines giving way to frantic strokes. Storm worsening, compass spinning, engines fine but horizon gone. I see lights, not from sea, from sky. A later entry simply read, no response on radio, need to trust instruments, but they're lying. The final page looked as if it had been written in shaking hands. The ink trailed off near the bottom. If anyone finds this, tell Lucy, I kept flying. Those 6 words spread through newsrooms and documentaries like an echo from beyond the clouds. Tell Lucy I kept flying. It was both confession and comfort. A message from a man who refused to give up even as the storm swallowed him whole. The discovery reignited debate among scientists, aviation experts, and conspiracy theorists alike. One camp believed in a magnetic storm, the kind that scrambles compasses and radar. March 1973 coincided with an intense solar flare recorded by observatories in Europe. They argued the storm disoriented Harlow's instruments, sending him hundreds of miles off course. Others pointed toward Cold War military activity. During that same period, several nations were testing experimental radar systems across the North Atlantic corridor. Could Flight 407 have been caught in one of those classified zones? Some even suggested it might have been mistaken for a spy aircraft. Then came a more haunting account. A Greenlandic Inuit elder, Nanukavana, told journalists that as a young hunter in 1973, he saw a fireball fall into the ice one winter night near his village. At the time, authorities dismissed it as a meteor, but the location he described matched the crash site almost exactly. Whatever truth lay behind these stories, one fact refused to fit. The plane's systems were intact. Radio, engines, navigation panel, all functional, yet no distress call was ever sent. Did Daniel panic? Was he unconscious before impact? Or As one investigator quietly asked, "Did someone else take control?" Despite exhaustive analysis, no theory could explain everything. The fuel pattern suggested power management. The landing gear was retracted, hinting at deliberate flight rather than freefall. Even more baffling, the clock on the dashboard had stopped 3 hours after the final radio call. Proof that something, or someone, had kept the craft alive long after Daniel's voice disappeared from the airwaves. Lucy Harlow, now in her 60s, traveled to Greenland to see the site herself. Standing before the ice-entombed wreckage, she whispered the same words carved onto her father's headstone back home. "Tell Lucy, I kept flying." She placed her hand against the glass wall of ice, tears freezing on her lashes. "He didn't crash," she said softly to reporters. "He fought to come home." Yet the questions remain. How did the plane glide that far without detection? Why was there no SOS though every system was operational? And what exactly were the lights Daniel described in his final entry? Not from sea, from sky? Scientists call them misread instruments. Believers call them something else entirely. Whatever the answer, the ocean kept its silence for half a century. Now the melting ice has begun to whisper. A truth half told, half buried. Maybe Flight 407 was just a victim of weather, or maybe Daniel Harlow saw something no one was meant to see. One thing is certain. His final words still echo through the static of time. Proof that even as the world forgot, he never stopped flying. For 50 years, the ocean kept his secret. Now, the ice has whispered part of the truth, but not all. What do you think really happened that night over the Atlantic? Was it nature, human error, or something far stranger? Something still waiting beneath the ice? Share your theory in the comments below.